We're here speaking with my grandma Wright, who came down from Blanding, Utah to visit us for a little while. She's about 81 years old, and so we thought we'd get her life story down on tape. Grandma, what we want to talk to you about is maybe some early experiences that happened in your life in Utah where you grew up. If you could tell us about a couple of them.
Well, I was actually born in Salt Lake City on the 6th of April in 1899, and we emigrated to Canada when I was a baby. Emigrating means at that time I'm trying to think. Jesse Knight. Heard of Jesse Knight, haven't you?
Uh-huh.
He's a man who saved the Credit Church when the church was almost bankrupt, because he was a good, honorable man, and because he was wealthy, and he told the church that he would save their credit. Because of that, the Lord gave him a dream where he could find wealth, and he went out and found this great wealth in a mine and become very, very wealthy. And he bought land up in Canada, and then he got people to emigrate up there. My father and mother chartered a railroad car, and on this railroad car they put everything they owned, including a cow, all their furniture and everything, and they sent, I was just an infant, about 6 months old, and there was my mother and my sister Alice, who was about 16, and my brother, who was 10, and my sister, who was 5 at the time, and I was an infant. We were in the part of the train in the crash, and he was in the boxcar, and he had his cow with him, and they traveled all the way to Canada in this boxcar with everything we owned. My father loved bread and milk, so when he had plenty of food with him, but he'd milk this cow and bread and milk at night. And he had all kinds of goodies that my mother had made, chicken and all kinds of good things. And when he decided he did want to eat some of it, found that there'd been a bum on the, what they called a hobo in those days, on the corn, eating nearly everything he had. But anyway, that's how we went to Canada when I was just a baby.
How long did you stay there?
For 13 years. I was 13 when we came back from there.
And then you came back to Blanding?
Back to, no, to Twilla.
Twilla.
No, I never heard of such a place. Blanding. I came back to Twilla when I was 13 years old.
When did you end up in Blanding, Utah? Where are you staying now?
Well, I taught school for 5 years. I went through the grade schools from all of high school in Twilla and graduated in Twilla High School and taught school for 5 years, country schools. I taught on the edge of the lake the first year. They call it Lake Point. I had 4 grades in one room, at the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade in that room. And the other teacher had the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th at her room. And she was the principal. And the next year I went to a little town called Ophir, which is from Twilla up in the mountains. It was a mining town, and I taught the 4th grade there. And the next year I went to Murray, to the school right out near where Aunt Carly lives. You see it, well, her daughter went there too. And I taught the 3rd grade there. And I came back to Twilla and taught the 5th grade in Twilla.
So where did you get all your training to be a teacher? Just from reading?
That was interesting. I never went to school when I was a kid up in Canada, except I went to the 2nd grade for a little while. Then when I was 8 years old, my father moved us to a ranch up in the Rocky Mountains. And I was there for 4 years. I wasn't in school. From 8 till 12. And I taught myself to read. And I could read really good. And then we got back down to Raymond, and I went into the 4th grade I went into the 5th grade for just a little while. And then we moved to Utah, and that's all the schooling I'd had. I got down to Twilla, tried to go in the 7th grade. I went in there one day and got scared and discouraged because I couldn't do it. Went home and cried, and the next day my father took me back to the 6th grade. went through the 6th grade through to high school and graduated. And then, what I did after that was work for a while in the store of my brother-in-law's store, grocery store. My sister Alice's husband, they were in Twilla and had what they call the Anderson Market. His name was Will Anderson. I worked for him. Then a friend said to me, come on, let's go up to Montana to the State Normal College and take normal, become school teachers. So we went up there in the summer, and I spent the 3 months of the summer, 12 weeks of training at the State Normal School in Dillon, Montana, and then came back and taught school that winter. And then in the summer, we would go to, I went to the University of Utah and got my certificate again to teach the next year. And then I went back to school in the summer. We would work in the winter, and we'd pay our way in school in the summer. We'd save money in the winter. And that's, in those days, you could do that. You didn't have to have a degree. You could go to school in the summer and get your teacher's certificate. You had to renew it.
Mm-hmm.
So I taught that way all those years.
Now, was it about this time where you met grandfather, your husband?
The last year, yes. Last year I taught some. I see, I taught the first year at Lake Point, and the next year at Over, I just told you. And then up Murray, and back to Twilla, then to Sunnyside.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Sunnyside with a friend. So, you know, I wanted to go and teach together so bad, and we were real close friends. We were both school teachers. And we go to the teachers' convention at Price, where you always go first to the convention, you know, we can teach. And I wanted so much to be together. We just begged that we could be together. But it turned out that we weren't together. They put me at Sunnyside, a school, several rooms in the school, quite a large school. And they put her out in a little country school, where there were just 2 teachers. And I was teaching there in Sunnyside when I met your grandpa.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you met him?
Well, he'd been there all the time. I would see him on Sunday whenever I went to church, and I'd say, who's that man over there? And, oh, who's that boy? Oh, that's Wright. He lives here with his sister. And he was working in the mine, and with his brother-in-law. And I was teaching, but I was going steady with a boy that I liked real well, and going with the gang. We had a lot of fun teachers and nice LDS fellows that were there. We really had a nice group, and he wasn't going out much at all. I met him finally. See, I went there to teach in September, and I didn't meet him till December, just a while before Christmas. I wasn't too much impressed because I liked this other one so well, and I just met him at a dance. But this other one wasn't with me. I went with the girls that night, and I wasn't serious with this other boy. He'd just been going there. So I met him at the dance, and it was the first time I'd ever been to a dance where they had a midnight supper. It was a wedding dance. They had a midnight supper, and then they danced on some more. And he and I went and ate together at the supper after we danced. He took me home that night, and I went home for Christmas. I wasn't too impressed at all at the time. I talked a lot, but it was about the other one, not him. Then I went back after Christmas, and the first time I went to the dance, he met me at the dance. Took me home from the dance, and that was in January. And we went steady from then until we were married on the 14th of March.
So, my father, Ed Wright, was your first child.
Yes, my first child.
Could you
No,
name?
he wasn't my first child. My first child, a baby boy, who died at birth. His name was Gerald Frank, and he died in your grandmother's house in Twilla. He was born and died there 16 hours later. And then we moved from my mother's home. Father died. I had to go home and help her take care of him because he died of cancer. And it was pretty sad. And at the time, I was carrying his first baby, and I had a kind of rough time with him being so sick and everything that I went through there. He died in November, and the baby was born early. Well, 8 months. In those days, they said that 8 months was not as safe as 7 months, which doesn't seem to make sense, but that's what they told us. And then your father was born a year later. This baby, I was married 25, this baby was born in 26, your father was born in 27. And they're in Twilla. And then we lived in so many different houses, you can't believe it. When your father was born, we were living up above a store. You know, an old-fashioned grocery store where they sold everything, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be old-fashioned. Then they had apartments upstairs, and we lived upstairs in an apartment. That's where he was born. And then we moved from that house. You can't believe it. We moved from that house to another house down the street. No, we lived first across the street from my mother for a little while, but he was just a baby. And then we moved on down to another little tiny house down the street from my mother. Well, he was still a little tiny kid. And then we moved on another block on farther down, and that's where Aunt Dorothy was born.
You really move around a lot like
We
that.
moved down in Blandy, I mean, Twilla, you can't believe it. And we moved there when Dorothy was born there. And we moved to another house down below that. Then we moved to a new house where the smelter, Grandpa was working at the smelter.
Uh-huh.
He was working in a flotation mill. And they had to work what they called reagents, kind of stuff that they use in the smelter. And it was really hurting his health a lot, an awful lot. And it wasn't good for him, and we decided we'd give up the new house, and we didn't have anything very much. At that time, there was a man that we met. My grandpa had played the violin. When I met him, he had played the violin, so did I. And that's one thing we did an awful lot together, was play the violins together. In fact, well, I'll tell you about that later, but we met this man, and he was from California. Well, he said it was College of Music. He taught music.
Mm-hmm.
And he found out your grandpa's talent for music, which is tremendous, you can't believe it. And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, you just quit this job and I'll take you and we'll go out and you can teach music lessons. It was the time that Dorothy was a baby, and that was 29, and that was the big depression. Where it wasn't like it is now. It was, well, nobody had any money, and you didn't have to have much money. Everything was just down to nothing anyway for the price. And so he says, I'll tell you, we'll move to Lehigh, and he says, you can go around from door to door or from place to place and teach music lessons. And he took him the first time in the home, introduced him to Professor Wright. His name is Professor Peterson. This is Professor Wright. He'll give you the music lesson. Never done it before. So then he gave the music lesson. He taught piano, well, violin, every kind of horn, every instrument you can name. He taught it, except the horn. You just name it.
My grandfather?
He did, every one of it. He could play, teach any of them. We charged $1.50 a lesson. $1.50 went a long ways in those days.
Yes.
And I went with him when we got moving to Lehigh, and I went with him and taught the guitar. I taught the Hawaiian guitar. And I left. In those days, you had no money, but everything you could get for what we called marbles and sticks. And you know what I mean? But that was the happiest time of our whole life. For instance, I'd say, I don't have any money, but I like music lessons. But I've got lots of tomatoes. You can have all the potatoes you want. Or somebody else will say, I've got a good garden, you have anything you want. Or I've got peaches, or I've got pears, or I've got whatever. Somebody else said, well, we'd like to have music lessons. If you need a babysitter, well, you can. These girls in Lehigh attended Dorothy and Ted for music lessons. Dorothy spent her first year in Lehigh. In fact, her birthday, we had to go that day. When we got back, this girl had made a cake with one candle on it. And your dad and Dorothy were just tiny little kids. And then we moved from Lehigh. We came to California for the first time to see what it was like. We'd heard so much about it. This Professor Peterson owned a house, you can believe it or not, but out for San Fernando Valley, which you know what it's like. In those days, San Fernando Valley was just a big, sort of a desert affair. And he had a little house there, and we'd never been to California. And he said, well, we didn't have anything to travel with. You buy gas for a quarter. So he said, why don't we go to California and you can stay at my place in San Fernando and we'll take food with us. So we bought a bunch of stuff. In fact, we brought a bunch of beans with us, dried beans and stuff we take that you could carry along food, you know, and bread and yeast and stuff. And we moved down there, first time in our life we'd ever been to California. And it rained the whole first week. We were steady. So
Happens every time someone comes down.
we didn't think much of it. It wasn't much fun that week. And then the sunshine came out and it was really nice. Dorothy learned to walk while we were in California.
Were you by the beach area too, or?
Not close to the beach, but we went to the beach, of course, to look at it. We went to see what Hollywood was like.
What was Hollywood like back then?
We thought it was wonderful. But there certainly wasn't much to it. In those days, we saw a studio or two, and they were making movies.
A couple of big studios. Were they making most of the movies outdoors? Or what, were they silent films?
Well, I'll tell you, the first one I ever saw in my life was a silent film. And that was when I was a kid up in Canada. Well, I still up in Canada. The first time that, anything ever moved, they had silent, you know, just on the screen, silent. Well, they were silent then, but I mean they didn't move. It just seemed
like a slideshow.
And the first moving show that we ever saw was up in Canada. It was quite an experience.
Do you remember the name?
Yes, I sure do. The name of it was Foxy Grandpa. And we went to it. As it happens, that was a tremendous night because we had an experience that night for some. My sister Alice, her husband lived up there in Raymond, Alberta, Canada. And that's after we'd been to the ranch and moved back to Raymond. Went to the ranch to the show that night, and the whole family went. Everybody in town went because it was going to move that night. And I remember that the moving part of the picture was Grandpa in a hammock, and somebody had, he was asleep, and somebody come and dumped him out. And how funny it was because it moved, you know, he fell out. It actually moved, and we was awfully excited about it. And the picture was silent, but, you know, it was have on the screen what they were saying.
Yeah.
In print. Whenever they said anything, you didn't hear anything, but you saw them move. And at this particular show, somebody, it was crowded, and somebody got it because a film caught on fire up in the projection room. Just a film, that's all it was. And yelled fire. And that place was in a panic. I've got a scar right here today from I almost bled to death on this hand. And the reason of it was that I was a neighbor of ours that was nearby, and everybody was trying to get out of there, except a few people had sense enough to sit still and not try to get out. I was just a kid, you know. And this neighbor picked me up and put me through a window. It had glass on the window.
Thanks a lot.
Well, he put me through to save me, you know, his wife and then me, and just tore this down here, and it just bled so bad. And of course, I put my hand to my face, you know. It didn't hurt much. I didn't realize it was bleeding. My mother saw me. She thought I was dying. She was scared to death. And my sister had a baby, a little girl then that was about, I guess she might have been 2 years old. And she wanted to sit with Grandma and Grandpa, so she had left her mother and father to walk back to sit by us and got, just as they said, fire. So she got lost in the crowd. So we were all hunting for her. My sister was going crazy, and my mother was going crazy. And
how long did it take the crowd to figure out that?
Oh, we all got out, and nearly all of us got out, and fire was out. There was 1 or 2 people who had sense enough to sit still and not get panicked. But you get in a big crowd and have somebody yell, and it's frightening. Anyway, we finally got Fern back to her mother, and that was quite an first movie we ever saw.
San Fernando Valley, I believe you said you were in. How long did you stay there?
Oh, about a week, I guess, or something like that. That's when I got my first fright of dogs. I'm scared to death of them.
What'd you run into there?
We went out one time just to look around, and we saw a sign where it said, oranges for sale. And so Grandpa said, why don't you go in and get some of those? I started in, and there was a sign that said, beware of the dog. And I said, I won't go in there. He said, oh, go on, it's all chained up, see? And it was. The dog was chained. So I walked barely up, and here come another from behind the house. And it jumped on me and attacked me right up to my throat. And Grandpa went out to defend, take care of me, and it jumped up on him. And the owner came out and stop the thing.
You called it off?
I've been afraid of them ever since.
I don't blame you.
Never go near a strange dog. What thanks?
Well, let's see. Did you go back to Utah then?
Oh, then we went back to Utah and we had Dorothy and Ted. Then we went to Lehigh.
Now, how are you traveling now?
We moved to Midvale. Oh, we traveled in the old car, the little old Ford that we had.
Before?
And I remember that we didn't have very much with us. We had those beans, and when we got to the line to go in California, they took the beans and dumped them out and looked them all over and put them back in a sack and give them back to him. I remember that. All that trouble because it didn't
It's pretty smugly.
any trash from one thing that would hurt the foliage, I guess. Oh, we ate mostly beans and whatever we could, some milk and we bought oranges and we made our bread, but it rained and that roof leaked on that house so bad, there was nothing in it much. That was our first experience in California. When the sun did come out, it was just lovely. But that was quite an experience then. We went back to Lehigh. And we moved to Midvale and still taught music lessons all around the area, Salt Lake and American Fork and Lehigh and Bingham and all through there. We'd go on certain days in certain towns. We'd go in the house, teach the piano lesson, the Hodge teaching a guitar lesson usually. And then we'd go to another house where we had an appointment. Like I say, we just got along just great with the money.
So it was mostly trade?
Yeah, we even got our rent, got our sewing done, we got our fruit, our vegetables, our milk, our kids tended, our sewing done. Just name it, we got it all for music lessons until it got so rough there at Midvale that it was that depression. But he had any money, and well, this one time we started out, went to Salt Lake, and usually he'd get a little money on the trip, so he'd get at least buy some gas. It was $1.50 a lesson, and that day nobody seemed to have any money. So I'll have to pay you next week, next week, next week. So when he got to Salt Lake, and Grandpa says, "You'll have to pay me today. I'll have you sent to home with." So this woman went out and borrowed some money from a neighbor to give him the $1.50. That music lesson, so we got to buy gas and get home to the kids. We got home all right. And that was when we were in Lehigh. Then we moved to Midvale. And we were still teaching music lessons at Midvale. And Devin was born in Midvale. And then we moved away from the little tiny alley where we were. I don't know if you can remember anything about it or not. I doubt it because he turned 6 in Midvale.
6 now.
And we went down to live on the avenue. And he started to school in September, you know. He just barely turned 6 when the school started. In those days, we used to send your dad, as little as he was, we used to send him to the store all the time. And we'd say, well, here's a quarter, go over to the bakery and get 3 loaves of bread, 3 for a quarter.
It's not bad.
And the things, that's just a little sample of prices. And he was quite the errand boy, as little as he was. He did most of the errands. We'd just send him to the store with a note and he'd get what we wanted. Then Grandpa, we got so hard up. We just simply didn't have anything to live on. And Grandpa just had to go away somewhere and find work, so he went out to Bewawe, Nevada, to work for his father's brother. On the railroad, where you get on one of these cars and go down the track and work on the railroad ties. He went out there, and I decided at this time I'd move to Blanding. They always asked us to come to Blanding. So he said, well, that's a pretty good idea. Why don't you move the kids and go down there, and I'll come when I can, as soon as I get some money to come with. We didn't know what we was going to do when we got there either. We just played it by ear, so I took Dorothy and Ted to Twilla, to my mother, and there was a man from Blanding going to go down. In fact, he's a brother to Aunt Beth Wright, who's married to Uncle Earl. He's still not married. He was an awfully nice man. And he took Dorothy and Ted down there, and I took Bevan and went by train to Bewawe to visit Grandpa. And he met me, I think it was Ely, where he met me. And we went out to Bewawe, and Uncle Dan had a little tiny shack there, not far from the railroad track. where they slept had a kitchen and a bedroom. And Dad had a tent put up a tent for he and I while I was there. And Bevan was such a little tiny fellow, about the size of Jake. And we stayed there for quite a little while. And then I took him and came to Blanding. Oh, Uncle Lawrence came up to Midvale and moved as much of our stuff as I had to have, and took Bevan and I and moved to Blanding. And then we started the rest of our stuff. Yeah, and then when Grandpa came, he brought all the rest of it and come on down there.
So now you're all in Blanding.
Yeah. Well, we were there then. And then Willard was born there, and all of us, and Lynn were all born in Blanding. Those three in that same house where we are now.
So what kind of memories do you have of the kids growing up there in Blanding?
Well, I remember your father. I used to think at one time he just hated me because he was so hungry to me. At his age in the teenage, oh. And Dorothy and Ted were always so close when they were little tiny kids. They were so close. And then they got to the point where they wouldn't even walk on the same side of the street with each other.
Why?
Oh, he wasn't going to walk school. He wasn't going to walk school. He was up the street, up the hill they went. He might not like this, but he knows it's the truth. And I'd say to him, Dorothy'd say, oh, he won't dance with me. And I'd say, Ted, you dance with your sister. So he said, ask her to dance. She said, well, I'm going on. He said, well, I asked her. I don't have to ask her anymore. But they were always so close, you know, until that age. And then there was this at the teenager kids are hungry with each other. I'll never forget how. And then he went away, you know, he was in the Navy.
In the Navy? How old was he when he was in the Navy?
18.
18? With parent consent?
Oh, yeah.
Was it?
Sure, well, you see what your father did was he decided that he wanted to go in the service. He didn't want to be drafted, and there was a war on. So he went to Salt Lake. He was graduated, but he went to Salt Lake and enlisted in the Navy because he didn't want to go in, didn't want to be drafted. And before he got out in Salt Lake, the war was over. He wouldn't have had to gone, but then he was in. So then he came to school. Your good luck,
Yeah.
he came to San Diego. And if that had happened, he never would have come to San Diego. Of course, that was necessary. It's all in the plan. It's all in the plan, I'm sure. And then he'd come back home, you know, when he's Indian, he'd dance with Dorothy, just treat her just great, all of her and all her girlfriends. And all her girlfriends was in love with him. And, Ted might not like
Is he quite the ladies' man?
Oh, was he? One of Dorothy's girlfriends was so much in love with him, she thought sure that she would get Ted. It was Vida.
Vida?
La Vida.
La Vida.
But Dorothy and all her girlfriends and all of them was after him. And he'd come home in his uniform and he looks so sweaty.
About how old is he? 19, 20?
Oh, about 19 then, coming home, you know. He'd come home one time. We had a window in our kitchen. I bet your dad, I can hardly remember, but I know we had it to the north. And I remember sitting there at the table that morning and I said, Ted's coming home today. I said, oh, Mom. Frank said, what's the matter? Are you crazy? No, I'm not sure. I looked out the window and here he'd come down through the back with his Navy bag back. Sure enough, how he got it, I guess he hitched the ride down or somewhere, but he arrived. He could tell you this. But I remember it very distinctly. I saw him coming. Without a doubt.
Was married. They moved to Blanding right away?
Yeah, they could use that.
Well, he was married in the fall. And they came to Mandi. Well, he came home from service. We came down to get him. And then right after he came home, or before he came home, he wrote us a letter and told us that not to make any plans for him because he decided he wanted to get married. So he came down and met your mother. Then he came home for a little while. And then he made arrangements as good, and we all went to Mandi. They were married in Mandi. And then he brought her to Blanding. They came to Blanding for a little while after they was married. And then your grandma, Jesperson, had a very bad heart at that time. They needed your mother to help take care of her, See, I think they came in the fall when they were married, and it was about January when Grandma Jesperson needed your mother, so Grandpa Wright brought them home. He said it was the coldest, worst snowstorm and the coldest winter we'd ever been in. And he brought them home in the car.
All the way there?
All the way from there.
And what kind of car is he driving? An old Ford or?
I think we had a, I don't know, what Tommy said.
I don't remember either.
It should be rough though.
They were just an old car, that's the best we had. And he brought them home. And we, well then, he stayed here from then on.
Mm-hmm. They had all the kids here. Well, thanks a lot for telling us your life story. Glad you could get it down on tape.
Well, that's poured up anyway. That takes up to when your father was
I'm
married.
sure there's a lot more to
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And we could never cover how much.
That's the early life.
Well, thanks a lot.